When it comes to platformers, Mega Man has always been one of the most popular franchises that has gone on to influence the genre as it's evolved over time. From its first appearance on the NES right up to the present day, it's seen countless iterations, spin-offs and collections that have kept it relevant throughout the years. By far one of my favourite games in the series has to be Maverick Hunter X on the PSP, that unfortunately is still stuck on the handheld. It's essentially a remake of Mega Man X that features a wealth of content to make your way through, such as a fully fledged story as well as several other modes that help increase the value of the game in meaningful ways. The gameplay itself is delightfully simple, and like every other Mega Man side-scroller, you can shoot, jump, climb ladders and move around, and it may not seem like much, but since most of the levels are designed in such a great way, the gameplay works well and can be extremely enjoyable, not to mention refreshingly challenging. But what makes it even more interesting is that throughout the game you are tasked with taking down several bosses, and upon their defeat you get to wield the weapons that they once called their own. Because of this, throughout the game you're constantly getting new abilities, such as bombs and new types of blasters that help mix up the gameplay and improve your chances against some of the more challenging aspects it presents. It's clear that a lot of work went into the game, and it shows every second of play. For a portable game, the production values are simply astonishing, which make it much more than just a simple remake. Mega Man fans will love this game, and it's a great choice for players who are looking for a serious challenge, so if you can find it for a decent price or are looking for something to emulate, Maverick Hunter X is a good option. Gladiator Begins is a prequel to an often overlooked PS2 game known as Colosseum, and sees you being dropped into the world of gladiatorial combat where you're tasked with earning your freedom as you fight against hordes of competitors for the appeasement of the crowds. What helps the game excel is its story that weaves a narrative full of political intrigue and allows you to take your own path and work with one of many different patrons as you climb the ranks. It does a really good job of portraying the time period, and with a few unexpected twists and turns, it's definitely something you'll find yourself getting invested in. Now at its core, the gameplay is a third-person hack and slasher that relies on its brutal combat and visceral gore. The controls are pretty simple, with each face button corresponding with a different part of your body, and you've got triangle for headbutts, square and circle for left and right swings, and finally X for hit and low. Add to this the ability to parry and perform special moves that are tied to specific weapons, and what you have is a really intuitive system with plenty of depth to dive into. The real standout though has to be the insane amount of customization that the game offers, and before each match you get to alter your character and build upon the 4 different fighting styles that the game brings. You've got single sword, dual wield, sword and shield or bare fists, and with up to 500 different weapons and types of armor to collect from fallen enemies, there's a lot to play around with, which can further be altered at the game's blacksmith, allowing you to increase the stats of any given piece of equipment. With its multiple endings, unrelenting combat and nigh on endless amount of customization, Gladiator Begins ends up being one of the best games you can find on the PSP. When Def Jr. first released on the PSP, it was hailed as one of the handheld's killer apps that was meant to prove that the console was more than up to the task of creating quality 3D platformers. And while it may not have achieved widespread acclaim, for those willing to look past its somewhat quirky nature, it offered a fun and truly creative experience. As the player, you take up the role of the Grim Reaper's son in what feels like something ripped straight out of a Tim Burton movie, as you're tasked with ridding the world of demons. And while the story doesn't overcomplicate things, it's full of dark humor and personality that helps the game really stand out against others on the system. The gameplay feels a lot like Ratchet and Clank and ends up being a hybrid of third-person shooting, platforming and hack and slash combat, with DJ's arsenal of weapons being a real highlight. From basic twin pistols to an electric gun, a rocket launcher and explosive hamsters, there's plenty of options when it comes to dealing with the relentless amount of monsters throughout each level, and your trusty scythe doubles as both a weapon for up close and personal combat, as well as a tool which can help you traverse the environment, allowing you to perform double jumps or a helicopter spin to glide across huge gaps. Now instead of taking on a linear progression of levels, it's all set up a lot like Mario 64, where you're presented with a sort of hub world that comes in the form of a museum, where you're free to hop into one of the many different portals that represent each stage. This non-linear approach gives you the freedom to tackle levels in any order, allowing you to take the game at your own pace as you work towards unlocking upgrades for your weapons and new abilities. Overall, it may not have lived up to the hype, but Def Jr. is well worth playing. Driver 76 is a prequel to the well-known series that got its start on the PlayStation, which takes place in New York City and puts you into the shoes of Ray, who's out to prove himself to win over the daughter of a powerful triad boss. Along for the ride is one of his friends, Slink, and together you've got to take on a series of high-stake jobs to earn their respect, which range from stealing cars to taking out rivals and races that add a nice amount of variety to the game. What makes it so good is the way that it embraces the time period, from the characters' afros and flares to the way each line of dialogue is delivered with swagger and soul. At points it feels like you're watching a classic 70s action film, and while the plot isn't exactly deep, it'll keep you hooked with its charm and perfectly paced twists. Now the gameplay is all about driving, and with over 50 different vehicles to jump into, from muscle cars and choppers to hot rods and trucks, there's plenty of variety, with each one handling differently and demanding that you get used to the handbrake in order to swerve around corners at high speeds. Now the on-foot sections of the game often get a bit of flack, but I found them to be a nice change of pace, giving you a chance to stretch your legs and allowing you to take the fight to the streets, where you can utilize a range of different weapons such as pistols, shotguns and rifles, and the lock-on system makes popping enemies a breeze. It's quite easy to go into the game expecting it to be a GTA clone, but doing so would be a mistake as it's not structured the same way as an open world, and instead offers up bite-sized missions that can be selected from the map, making it perfect for picking up and playing in short bursts. Although not without its flaws, Driver 76 is a stylish and action-packed racer that's definitely worth taking for a spin. The Gears of Destiny is a 3D fighter that's based off an anime and throws you into fast-paced, spell-slinging combat, making each fight feel like an episode of the show come to life. You get the choice of up to 20 different characters who all come along with their own unique weapons and movesets to master, but where the combat really shines is with something known as range shift, a system that changes your moves depending on your distance from the enemy. At long range you'll be raining down beams and projectiles, but up close you'll be weaving combos with melee strikes and counters. And with the ability to soar through the air at your opponent, it's all too easy to quickly jump in and out, adding a really strategic aspect to each fight, encouraging you to mix up your approach and adapt to your enemy's tactics on the fly. Of course, as with most other fighters, each character gets their own screen-filling super move, and this is where Gears of Destiny really shines. They're so satisfying to pull off, and after building up your gauge you can unleash it with some devastating results, allowing you to flip the tide of a battle and come out on top. Now one area where the game excels is with its visuals, which end up being some of the best the PSP has to offer, as each character model is crisp and expressive, staying faithful to the anime's iconic designs with a level of detail that pops on the handheld screen. The environments themselves are just as impressive, with vast ruined cities, mystical voids and lush forests that lend a vibrant backdrop for each encounter to play out in, with the camera taking on a cinematic approach that gives each hit or blast a real visceral quality. If you've played the other fighting games on the system to death like Tekken or Mortal Kombat, Gears of Destiny will feel like a breath of fresh air, so whether you're a fan of the show or just fighting games in general, there's plenty here to love. It's so easy to simply write off Digimon as a shameless Pokemon clone, and to be fair you wouldn't be half wrong, but when it comes to Digimon Adventure, it does introduce a fair amount of its own ideas that help it carve out its own path. The story is extremely light and amounts to nothing more than you simply having to tame the monsters throughout the world, with you travelling to different areas while collecting and battling Digimon, which can end up being very addictive. Near the beginning you're given the choice of 3 Digimon that can eventually evolve into stronger forms, but unlike Pokemon you have a choice in their path of evolution if they meet the required stats. This means you can have a team of different Digimon that are all spawned from the same egg, which is a rather novel idea that works out quite well. Now customization comes in the form of the Digichip system, a clever nod to Final Fantasy VII's materia, and sees each Digimon having a grid of slots that expand as you level up, where you plug in chips for different effects. There are 4 different types, where you've got red for stat boosts, blue for skills, green for passive abilities, and pink for effects. It's a pretty neat system that allows you to alter each of your party members' abilities and set them up for any situation throughout the game. Now at the core of the experience are the battles, which all play out in a turn-based fashion, with each of your monsters having their own unique skills to use on the enemy. And whilst the system isn't exactly deep, it does offer up a bit of strategy, with different elemental and status effects coming into play. Overall, if you've been a fan of the Digimon games since their inception on the PlayStation, then Digimon Adventure will no doubt be right up your street. And for those those of you not familiar with the games but actually enjoy monster collecting itself, I'd say there's enough here to warrant a purchase or download. After the success of the first game on the PSP, it was only a matter of time until we'd see a sequel that set out to refine its card-based stealth formula and improve upon nearly every aspect it introduced by transforming it into a slick and stylish experience. The first bold change was the visuals that left behind the muted tone of its predecessor and instead opted for a cel-shaded aesthetic that lent the game a huge amount of visual flair, and it even came along with an option to play the game in stereoscopic 3D thanks to the glasses that were included in the box. Needless to say, this different approach adds a lot of charm to the game, but what really steals the show is the gameplay. It's all based around cards, with each mission unfolding on a grid-based map where each move, from sneaking past guards to knocking out enemies, is dictated by a deck of cards you build and play. You've got 4 different types: movement, action for items or attacks, support for buffs, and character cards that boost your stats or perform special moves. You get to draw 6 cards each turn, but using them requires a cost where lighter actions such as moving cost less, but deadlier actions like using a weapon cost more. It forces you to be tactical with the cards you play and adapt to the battlefield conditions when the card you want doesn't turn up. It's a really cool system that's full of strategy, with up to 200 cards to unlock, with cameos of fan favourite characters and items. It's an absolute collector's dream that manages to keep each encounter feeling fresh and engaging. Even though it's not exactly the most traditional Metal Gear outing on the PSP, its unique card-based mechanics likely won't be to everyone's taste, but for hardcore fans of the series or those of you who are fond of tactical RPGs, Metal Gear Acid 2 will not disappoint. Seventh Dragon 2022 is a JRPG that's set far into the future where monsters have descended upon the Earth and humanity is on the brink of collapse. It's up to you and your band of heroes to travel through time and collect several items that have the power to stop the birth of a final deadly dragon with the power to destroy the world once and for all. As for the game's main draw, combat and exploring, the first word that comes to mind is addictive. With 8 character classes to choose from and a number of different skills to learn for each, there's plenty of variety to keep the player busy. You also get to create your party from scratch, and there's a nice amount of customization available to tailor them to your liking, with even more options becoming available the further you make it into the game. May that be weapons, armor, or cosmetic choices, the game constantly drip feeds you new items and ways to counteract enemies, with a turn-based system in place that sees you building an offense around various skills that can drastically increase your damage output. On top of this, the number and effects of buff and debuff skills among the classes open up even more doors for several abilities and will help increase the effectiveness of others used by your party members. In short, there's a hell of a lot of strategy involved in each battle, and getting to grips with the various systems that comprise the game may seem daunting at first, but after some time you'll slowly begin to realise what works and what doesn't against certain enemy types. For PSP players, Seventh Dragon 2022 is yet another outstanding JRPG, and even though it doesn't have the polished ideas and well-rounded mechanics of the greatest in the genre, it still manages to have a unique personality and strong enough gameplay that make it easy to recommend. Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles is essentially a remake of Rondo of Blood that was completely rebuilt and doesn't just revisit one of the most infamous entries in the series, but gives it the improvements it so desperately needed. You take up the fight as Richter and are sent to storm Castlevania and take out Dracula, and that's it. There's no backstory, dialogue, map, experience points, or any of the extra stuff fans have come to expect from the series, and it instead just focuses directly on the gameplay. You've got to leap and whip your way through a series of side-scrolling levels, destroying creatures of the night and the occasional boss fight along the way. And you've got a few ways to get this done, but your main means is your whip, which can be upgraded and grants you the ability to temporarily launch fireballs. You've also got the classic arsenal of secondary weapons, such as the crucifix boomerangs and holy water bombs, that all have a role to play in taking on one of the game's many inventive enemies that'll test your reflexes and skill to the limits. A nice touch is the level design, and unlike more modern entries, the focus is put back on the platforming aspect of the series. While the first couple of areas are little more than training grounds for newcomers, the game hits its stride in the latter half. From blood-rusted spikes, spinning blades and moving walls, there's a lot to contend with apart from the undead, and each level offers up different paths in the form of locked doors, which can be opened by finding several keys scattered throughout the area. If you're like me and have always been a fan of Castlevania, then the Dracula X Chronicles is definitely worth checking out, as it calls back to the series' roots and offers one of the most challenging but rewarding entries to date. Gungnir is a tactical RPG that follows a ragtag group of friends who come across a mystical spear that falls from the sky and chooses them to wield it, igniting a full-scale war against an evil empire who are intent on bringing the kingdom to its knees. The story is easily one of the best aspects of the game and follows your transformation from a reluctant fighter to a determined leader that's only bolstered by an incredible cast of characters that add a lot of depth to the events throughout the game. Regardless of how well the narrative is though, if the gameplay wasn't up to the same standard, it would all be for nothing, but thankfully Gungnir delivers in this department as well. And it's not just a simple retread of Final Fantasy Tactics or Disgaea, as it manages to create something it can call its own, with a combat system that's just as inventive as it is engaging. Each battle plays out on a grid, but instead of the standard turn-based mechanic, each move phase is governed by wait times instead. Every action, whether it's a swift sword slash, a spell or movement, carries a numerical delay that determines the timing of your next turn. Faster actions allow you to act sooner, while more powerful attacks require more time, creating a dynamic rhythm that'll keep you alert and focused. Naturally, customization plays a huge role as well, with you being able to deck out your characters with a large range of different weapons and equipment that all come along with different properties, allowing you to tailor your party to your specific approach in battle. On the whole, with its blend of punishing strategy, incredible storytelling and visual flair, Gungnir is a game that delivers on all fronts, offering a different twist on the formula without losing sight of what makes tactical RPGs so good. So if you're looking for something new to emulate or pick up, this is one game you shouldn't skip. Well, that does it for another video. Keep an eye out for the next part, as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos that release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining the Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.